Feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we must accept the results of this election. Earlier today, I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power.
Finally, Kamala Harris steps out of the shadows and delivers her concession speech. But what's even more entertaining is the meltdown that followed on The View. As expected, the host had nothing positive to say. The clips I'm about to show you are a perfect example of this. They're basically reading straight from MSNBC's excuse book on why she lost the election. Let's dive into their reactions to the results and see how they're processing this. Take a listen.
So, how you feel? I'll start. Yeah, go ahead. My takeaway is that the system works. We live in a democracy. People spoke. This is what people wanted. I vehemently disagree with the decision that Americans made, but I feel very, very hopeful that we have a democratic system in this country. We should value it. We should love it. We should protest if the situation arises that we need to protest, which I'm sure it will. And I've been through this before with Nixon. It's been very difficult. But boy, oh boy, do we have a country if we can keep it. Yeah.
She begins with the typical response you'd expect, polite and measured, which, to be honest, caught me off guard. But don't get too comfortable because later in the video, she says something completely outrageous that goes against everything she just stated. I'll show you that in a moment. The real jaw-dropper, though, happens when Sunny Hostin is asked about her thoughts on Kamala Harris's loss. Let's dive into that.
I don't know. I'm profoundly disturbed. I think if you look at the New York Times this morning, the headline was America makes a perilous choice. I think that in 2016, we didn't know what we would get from a Trump administration, but we know now. And we know now that he will have almost unfettered power. And so I worry, not about myself, actually. I don't worry about my station in life. I worry about the working class. I worry about my mother, a retired teacher. I worry about our elderly and their Social Security and their Medicare. I worry about my children's future, especially my daughter, who now has less rights than I have. And I remember my father telling me many, many years ago that I was the first person in his family to enjoy full civil rights. And now I have less civil rights than I had when he told me that. So again, I'm profoundly disturbed that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution did not prevent someone who participated in an insurrection from becoming president of the United States. I think that going forward, the convicted felon box on employment applications better be taken off, because if you can be the president of the United States, then you should not be prevented from employment in this country, because I remember applying for my jobs as a federal prosecutor, and there was a box for convicted felons. Well, and so that box better be taken off. And I think our healthcare system is now at risk. I think
no fluoride for anyone.
Yeah, economists have made clear that he's going to increase the debt by $7.75 trillion. I'm worried about mass deportation and internment camps. And I'm also worried about Elon Musk warning Americans to prepare for temporary hardship. I'm surprised at the result, but I'm not surprised. As a woman of color, I was so hopeful that a mixed race woman married to a Jewish guy could be elected president of this country. And I think that it had nothing to do with policy. I think this was a referendum of cultural resentment in this country.
Cultural resentment? That's her angle? Sunny Hostin clearly has no clue what she's talking about. We already know she views everything through the lens of racism, and to claim that she or her daughter has fewer rights now than during the civil rights era is just absurd. This kind of mindset shows how some people live in a bubble, completely disconnected from reality. The world isn't as terrible as they want us to believe. It's not all doom and gloom. If they could just step out of this victim mentality, they might actually see the progress we've made. The real issue here isn't about cultural resentment, it's about policy. Kamala Harris's policies were simply not good for the country, and this election loss was a clear referendum on that. I always use this example. If Condoleezza Rice or even Michelle Obama were running for president, the reaction would have been completely different. But instead, it was Kamala Harris, someone who is widely seen as unlikable and completely incapable of discussing her policies with any clarity or energy that inspires confidence. So no, Sonny, stop making excuses. Just admit that you've lost, take a step back, and maybe reflect on why things turned out this way. Blaming everyone else isn't going to change the reality. Let's quickly talk about this. It's clear they couldn't handle the fact that Kamala Harris lost the election. Instead of addressing the real reasons, they've turned to identity politics and started pointing fingers. Now, they're even dragging free speech and Elon Musk into the mix, blaming him as another reason for her loss. Here's what they had to say.
Some pundits are asking what the vice president could have done differently to break through with the voters. Of course, she only had 3 months to campaign, rally. She kicked his butt all over the country over the course of those 2 months. She did every debate, every interview. People kept saying they didn't know who she was, so then she told them who she was. So how much more could she have done? Or should she? I mean, aside from buck naked dancing on the top of the table, I don't know what else she could have done.
I don't think she could have done more. I think she left it all out on the field. I think she raised $1 billion in 3 months. I think that she ran a flawless campaign, and I maintain that.
That response perfectly shows why she lost. They're completely out of touch. The real question she should have focused on was, what were the voters trying to tell me? Voters kept saying, Kamala Harris, we don't really know you. Can you show us who you truly are? Don't just give us rehearsed answers. Give us something real. Instead of The View addressing that, they continue to spread misinformation about the election. They're just as responsible for misleading people as any other media outlet. Now that they've finally accepted Trump as the president-elect, it really makes you wonder, what took them so long to concede? The same goes for Kamala Harris. Why did it take her so long to deliver her concession speech?
Hi there, Lester. Well, as we await the Vice President's remarks right behind me, we can tell you that this is the first time that we will see her publicly since yesterday afternoon when she was at DNC headquarters at a phone bank. But I was here yesterday, Lester, and I can tell you the mood here very different than it was yesterday, at least earlier in the night. We saw just such a deflated crowd here as the returns started to come in. Now, we can tell you that the Vice President was at her residence throughout the day and that she was working on her speech. Interestingly, a Biden aide tells me that she really didn't have this type of concession speech fully ready. She had expected instead to have a type of speech where she would tell her supporters to hold on because her campaign really expected this election results process to drag on for several days.
She knew it was over last night. She could have conceded then, maybe even made a quick call to Trump. Instead, she waited until today, later in the day actually. Fine, we'll let that slide. But what we can't ignore is what she said in her speech. Take a look at this.
Feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we must accept the results of this election. Earlier today, I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power. A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. That principle, as much as any other, distinguishes democracy from monarchy or tyranny. And anyone who seeks the public trust must honor it. At the same time, in our nation, We owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States.
She's the one who wanted to change the Constitution and was part of an administration that tried to revise Title IX, allowing men to compete in women's sports. Let's be real, she doesn't truly believe in what she's saying. Now, I want you to hear the message she had for young voters. It's clear this was directed at them, likely because their support had a huge impact on the outcome of this election.
To the young people who are watching, it is... I love you. To the young people who are watching, it is okay to feel sad and disappointed, but please know it's going to be okay. On the campaign, I would often say, when we fight, we win. But here's the thing. Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win. That doesn't mean we won't win. The important thing is don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop trying to make the world a better place. You have power. You have power. And don't you ever listen when anyone tells you something is impossible because it has never been done before.
What's really interesting about the second part of her statement is that she was unintentionally describing what just happened. Young voters stood up to her party and said, "We're not falling for your propaganda. We see the actual results." And on top of that, Trump accomplished something many people said was impossible. Once again, we see Democrats trying to deliver a positive message, but they end up describing what Trump has already been doing. Then, when they try to criticize him, it's really just them projecting their own shortcomings. Now let's shift to your favorite former president, Barack Obama. Here's what he had to say just moments ago.
Continued moments ago, former President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama released a statement. It reads in part, "This is obviously not the outcome we had hoped for, given our profound disagreements with the Republican ticket on a whole host of issues. But living in a democracy is about recognizing that our point of view won't always win out and being willing to accept the peaceful transfer of power."
So that's what Obama had to say. Honestly, I don't have much to comment on it. Does anyone really care what he says at this point? He did everything he could to help Kamala win. But the truth is, he was backing a weak candidate. That's the bottom line. She's not Obama, plain and simple. Now, here's what's being reported about President Biden inviting Trump to the White House. Take a look.
Anderson, as we mentioned at the top, President Biden and President-elect Trump also spoke today. We learned that Mr. Biden will address the nation tomorrow. CNN's Kayla Tausche is at the White House for us. First, Kayla, what do we expect to hear from the president tomorrow? And what did you hear about the conversation he had not only with Donald Trump, but of course with his vice president?
Well, the conversations were very brief. They were very high level. A White House official said that President Biden congratulated the vice president on what he described as a historic campaign. And as for the conversation with now President-elect Donald Trump, President Biden talked about being a president for all people and ushering in a peaceful transition of power. Now, clearly, it is not a bittersweet moment for President Biden. It is expected to be quite bitter as he delivers this address in a race he believed that he could have won. Whether that there's any tinge of that in his remarks, we don't expect there to be. We expect him to be on script and speaking at a high level. But of course, we'll see when he actually delivers.
Here's what we've got so far. Kamala Harris has finally given her concession speech. It was short, maybe 10 minutes at most, and honestly, not much to talk about. She did speak with President-elect Trump, and Joe Biden also had a conversation with him. Biden is set to address the nation tomorrow. Now, as for The View, they're doing what they always do, digging in and fighting hard to tear Trump down. They'll criticize his every move because it fuels their ratings. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Without Trump, most of these shows wouldn't even have a platform. He's the centerpiece of their content. Still, it was satisfying to see The View reluctantly accept defeat while throwing in their usual meltdowns. And seeing Harris concede, even if it was expected, felt like a necessary moment of closure. So, What's your take on all of this? What did you think of The View calling for censorship on social media as though we're back in 2020? And how did you feel about Harris's concession speech and her overall tone? Share your thoughts in the comments below.